Okay, so we covered two sort of perspectives on users. We covered a sort of cynical perspective that sees users as being complete passive molds to whatever media they're consuming. And another perspective, which is sort of an industry-centered perspective, which allows the user some degrees of freedom in their sort of analysis of what's going on, but also sort of premises itself on being able to control or sort of redesign the user experience. So it's kind of somewhere in between. So for this video, I wanted to cover the idea that users can make a statement, so that users can kind of read texts oppositionally or in a negotiated way, using Stuart Hall's terminology from the last video, in order to kind of craft an experience that is tailored to them, or that intervenes politically. So the most recent example of users resisting or jamming the system comes from K-pop and the Black Lives Matter movement, when K-pop fans co-opted popular White Lives Matter and racist hashtags during the political unrest in the United States in order to link these racist hashtags with K-pop content, thus hashtag bombing the system and drowning out racist statements on social media. So this is an example of users collectively acting in an oppositional way in order to change the system, in order to kind of actually intervene in the software. Another example, older example of this type of software activism on the part of users comes from Victoria's Secret, when they launched a brand that or launched a campaign that had certain taglines on underwear that people felt were sort of belonging to rape culture, like sayings like "unwrap me," so what happened is users jammed its advertising to create oppositional messages affiliated with the brand, in contrast to the sayings on the underwear that Victoria's Secret was promulgating. And in order to kind of launch a feminist critique on some of these taglines being used, and they launched a satirical website called Victoria's Secret, which had the exact same ad aesthetics as Victoria's Secret, but placed different taglines on underwear like "Who loves consent?" and "I love my body." No means no. So it was quite clever and sort of went viral, and Victoria's Secret was none so pleased with what was happening. But it is an example of users intervening in a corporate message in order to make a user-centered statement. Another political tactic that falls into sort of tricking or jamming the system is offered by Emily Vandernagel and her coverage of what is called Voldemorting. So this was used by some feminists to talk about misogynist websites online by screenshotting them rather than providing or copying the link to work around giving those websites more hits. So if you want to refer to content that you find offensive, but you don't want to give those websites or Twitter feeds your hits, then screenshotting is a sort of clever workaround in the system, and that's called Voldemorting, based on the Harry Potter sort of idea that you can't sort of mention the name of the archvillain. So these are quite aggressive tactics that give some users a good deal of power, or at least users aspire to power. What is sort of a more tempered version of this? What if you don't really want to jam the system, but you want to work within it to kind of gel your identity and needs into the allowances of whatever you're consuming? There's something called a procedural rhetoric in video gaming that Ian Bogost defines as procedural rhetoric states that the rules of the game create spaces of possibility that the player is supposed to explore. Based on the actions that the rules make possible, the game uses the rules to make an argument about the process of something or about how something in the world does or should work. So what he's saying is that our actions are bounded within a set of limitations and confines in a video game, but they're ones that we can work within to make the experience that we want to have if we're so motivated. So, and I think this extends to any type of media. The media that you're creating right now is going to have a set of limitations for users' experience and a set of possibilities for users' experience. And you kind of have to take those into consideration if you want users a little bit of freedom and wiggle room in order to see themselves in that technology. So this idea of procedural rhetoric is well documented with the experiences of queer video gamers who do not really identify with their avatars or the kinds of femininity or masculinity that games construct, or don't identify with the romantic experience the game offers. So, women who kind of play video games and don't really identify with, super buxom, curvy, super skinny elf goddess wielding swords. Like, maybe some of us don't really see ourselves that way. So Kobrova outlines strategies of queer gamers navigating games that are not made for straight people. And these sort of strategies include ideas like imaginative play, where you can read queer content into the game, a sort of idea of applying imaginative play to watching Harry Potter might be reading a queer relationship into Harry and Ron's sort of relationship in Harry Potter, which there's some slash fiction writers who have done that, a coupling. Slash fiction is writing, rewriting sort of popular texts so that there's a queer relationship between two people that doesn't really exist in the original text. So it's another kind of example of imaginative play and oppositional reading. Another tactic is stylized performance, like outfitting yourselves with pink accessories if you are a gay dude who's playing the game. And the third tactic is role playing. So identifying with a pre-designed queer character in the game, or the extent to which the game affords this identification through non-heteronormative characters like ambiguously sexual avatars. Let me unpack that. So this is the idea that, there might be some sort of characters in video games that are quite gender liquid and sort of non-conforming and it's vague, like the asexual kind of elf character, and sort of reading into and sort of identifying with what you think is a queer coded part of the game, and that's the idea of role playing. So there are many ways to experience a game as queer, above and beyond just having two gay characters make out or a trans female character fall in love in games. There are other avenues created by the way that people take advantage of procedural rhetoric in the structure of the game. So Michael argues, I argue that queer game spaces are not marked only by the presence of queer representation or content, but rather can be identified by the queer sense of player agency that these spaces allow. So in the first part of that sentence, he's talking about, in order to have a queer experience of a game, it doesn't have to have like openly gay characters running around. I mean, it'd be awesome if it did to kind of be gender inclusive, but it doesn't have to do that. There have been queer sort of strategies for playing video games for quite a while by queering the sense of player agency that these spaces allow. So he's kind of referring to this idea of procedural rhetoric and how we as users can work within this idea of procedural rhetoric, of whatever device that we're interacting with, in order to have the experience we want to have. And this is kind of going back to Stuart Hall's idea of a negotiated reading, that we can kind of negotiate our place in any sort of media environment to kind of somehow craft and pin together an experience that is meaningful to us. He's saying that these queer spaces are created by the way that player agency is designed in these games. So Michael elaborates further to say that queer gamers who find ways of either instilling queer gameplay tactics or making their own queer games are part of a queer gaming counterpublic. So a public is a group of people united by a certain idea or media, or consuming a media. And a counterpublic is a group of people who are oriented against that public or the dominant way of consuming that media. So Michael states that queer gaming allows its counterpublic members to author and interact with spaces of queer futurities, stepped up on that word, and possibilities by displacing citizenship as an end goal. So what does this mean? It means that many media nurture a public, and a part of belonging to that public is the experience of citizenship. So I am a citizen of Lord of the Rings, or I'm a citizen of the Marvel universe, or I'm a citizen of Apple products. Queer gaming ignores that sense of belonging and just plays the game counter to the way it was meant to be played. Example being pink accessories on a male avatar, or picking an avatar that is the opposite gender, which is something that a lot of us have done. Like, that's a kind of a really widespread way of even straight people queering the game. So even if you're straight and you choose an avatar of the opposite gender, you are to some extent queering the game at a minor level by using its procedural rhetoric. So queer gaming sort of displaces citizenship as the end goal, much like the cyborg displaces the idea of a whole self as the end goal. So the idea that when you participate in a piece of media, you don't have to wholesale hop on board with being a citizen of that media, right? In the way that the Frankfurt School says that we're kind of just complete automatons in front of whatever media that we're consuming. And if we are sitting down and watching a Marvel movie, we are completely in the Marvel citizenship world. Like, no, this idea says that's not exactly true, that we can kind of create our own identities. Sorry, the dog is like sleeping really loudly. I don't know if you can hear that. That's happening in the background. But we can create our own experiences, and this is particularly within the terrain of gender identity, but there are other types of identity out there that we can kind of create our own experiences of class identity, of racial identity, of abilities identity. So this gives sort of the user a great deal of agency in sort of determining their experience. And in terms of your projects, you might ask, out of these videos, what you might ask is, whom is my project designed for? Does it deny entry to certain players? Or can I create a flexible procedural rhetoric that gives different people chances to experience the media? And again, procedural rhetoric can apply to a range of different media. Think about the constraints and affordances in terms of both structure and content of TikTok as a media platform. So this doesn't mean to say that you have to make something that will appeal to everyone, because that's impossible. But it is saying it's important to think about and consider whom your constructed user is and whom your project might exclude. So when we make media, we are subconsciously or consciously constructing an ideal user that we have in mind, an ideal audience that we want to reach. But it's important to kind of question, who does this audience exclude in the construction of of this ideal user? Who exactly are you leaving out of that conversation? And how might you incorporate that sort of person, either literally by giving them direct representation in your project, or through the idea of procedural rhetoric, of having a flexible sort of experience enough to sort of get people to identify with it from a variety of different experiences. Yep, that's me.